but let me start recording. All right, so we are recording, and the first thing I want to do is pull up this fabulous thing. So this is, hang on, it's getting there, sharing slowly. I think I can. Whoa, whoa. I think I can. Okay, that's not what I want. That's what I want. Can you see my blank screen here? I'm responding to my daughter who said she boarded.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Love you. All right, my daughter literally got on an airplane today and is headed for Barcelona. So exciting. It is awesome. So she just texted me. She just boarded from, she went LA to Chicago, and the next time she talks to me, she will be in Spain, she says.
Wow.
I know. It's
Wow, from grandma.
Well, from grandma. Oh, here was the tab I already had open. Okay, so this is the website for USAD. This is the website that is the official United States Academic Decathlon website, USAD.org. And it is just lovely and wonderful, by which I mean not really, because usually they have things like, that are from ages old. But if you hover over here on the curriculum button, you will see hidden something that says curriculum updates. And curriculum updates is really like, hey, we got something wrong and we would like to fix it. So I just want to throw out that they released this material May 15th. So it's been 5 weeks. 5 weeks. And theoretically, they were working on it they decide the topics about 2-3 years in advance. So theoretically, someone was working on this topic, like they're already working on next year's topic now. So theoretically, people, I don't know, could like edit it. I'm not just talking spell check, but like actual editing, like what my mother did for a living for like 40 years. So these are the, errors that they have already found. And I will come and do them. I just wanted to show everybody and talk to people about them. You can check back here if you're the kind of person who really likes printed copies of things. If you click on any of these links, you can actually open up a new PDF of the mistake page and it will print correctly. If you're accessing it online, it doesn't self-correct, but we go through it. I just want to point out, we haven't even touched the literature, but there are corrections in the art resource guide, and there are corrections, a lot of corrections, in the SOSI resource guide. A lot of them we haven't gotten to yet, but like, honestly, some of them are so dumb. Like this one, in the art reproductions booklet, that's this, the one that is the like actual pieces of the art, okay? It says in the art reproductions booklet in the table of contents and on page 7, the name Florence Punderson should be Prudence Punderson. Now, I have a feeling my mother downloaded this after, mine says Prudence, but yours may say Florence, depending on when I printed it and everything else. Yeah, basically, I just cannot even, I don't even know what to say. So we'll come back and take a look at this. Some of them I think are like, silly, but I don't know, like, hey, look, we got the dates wrong in 23 different places, it says right over here, whatever. All right, so there's that. What can I say? I just find them challenging. All right, so I'm gonna stop share for a second, see if anybody has any questions. Hello, my friends who are here. Because it's Wednesday, we are going to do SOSI first and then art. So my plan for SOSI is to get through most of the Southern strategy, and then next week wrap up section 2. So one last thing before I review a little bit of what we did earlier in section 2 and then go on. So Decker and I, after you guys all get off, we usually stay around and talk because that's what we do all the time. And I was saying, I'm trying to get through the end of the section. We just, we're talking about these wins and losses all over the early colonies. I was like, but it's really weird because the battles we're talking about right now in this discussion are in 1777 and 78. And I was like, it's really weird because we haven't talked about the Declaration of Independence yet. So, oh my God, I didn't even see that. I'm looking at the chat right now, and the SOSI correction. Yeah, it's on page 38, which I didn't get to yet, but yeah, 25,000 slaves, just kidding. We mean 500,000. If I lend them $25,000 and they want to lend me $500,000, we can call it even, comes out. Yeah, perfect. No, I'm so glad you did. Okay, so Decker and I were talking, and I was like, it's really weird because, okay, so the Constitution doesn't get written until after we win the war, that's 1781, but we should have had the Declaration of Independence. Like, that's the whole point of this war, is that we declared our independence. And I was like, that's so awkward. Like, how did we get to a battle a year or two later and we haven't talked about anything? And so we went back and looked. Decker and I went back and looked at the table of contents, which again, I never usually look at. And it has the SOSI packet arranged. I knew it was arranged in sections, but I didn't get what the sections were so specifically. Section 1 is the lead up to the war, kind of. Section 2 is the war itself and like a string of battles. So if you're like me and some of these battles are starting to blend in with each other, you're not alone, because essentially section 2 is 20 pages of just this battle, these guys won, these guys lost, next battle, these guys won, these guys lost, next battle. And that can be really overwhelming. Section 3 in the SOSI packet turns out to be political things and how they worked. And essentially, they go back in section 3 to like 1775-ish and are like, so let's talk about the political and social and economic in things that were happening, as if you could divorce the battles themselves from the political, social, and economic consequences of like what created those battles in the first place or why. And that seems to me a very dumb way to do this. So I really think that when we finish SOSI, we're going to take a couple of days to kind of integrate sections 1, 2, 3, and 4 in a way that makes sense, because I mean, you could talk about picking up what's happening today, right now. So Russia invaded Ukraine. And if you wanted to talk about all the different battles and the cities that were going on right now, you could do that. You could have a map out and you could, plug flags in everywhere and sort of talk about those different areas. But the truth is that it would be really a dumb way to approach this. Russia didn't just randomly battle in Ukraine in a string of cities. They're going after this port city that is open 12 months a year, because Russia doesn't have any ports that are open 12 months a year unless they conquer farther south. They are going after this area because it is the bread basket. It literally can make food. They're going after this because it has oil. They're going after this because they want to, dominate the Ukrainian people and show that they are the moral victors. You can't just say like, oh, and then there was Dunsk, as if that answers all their questions. Paul asks if it's because different people wrote the sections. Interestingly, I don't think so. I exactly what Decker is saying. I don't think so. I think that they just thought that was a good way to sort of chunk this out. And I just have to tell you, I really strongly disagree. I really think that if I had been writing this guide, I would have sort of said like, 1750 to 1775. And then I would have done it chronologically, like 1776 would have been a chapter and 1777 would have been a chapter, and maybe combine a couple of the chapters, because some of these battles, like you just heard, it was the European custom to stop battling over the winter. So a lot of things kind of happen in sort of opposite of the school year fashion. They fight all summer and then have a winter break as opposed to having a summer break. But I just wouldn't have done it like this. So if you're getting a little bit lost, a little bit like me, don't worry. We're going to kind of go through this. This is our first read through. This is our first visitation of all of this. If you can kind of get these almost, if you think of them like pearls on a necklace or beads on a string, and you kind of think, oh, I remember the Battle of Saratoga because everybody was supposed to fight there, and then 2 of the 3 British guys didn't show up. If you can kind of try to remember bits and pieces of that, we can string those beads together as we go afterwards. So without further ado, no worries, everybody. You guys are so sweet that you come in. You're not even coming in late and being being disruptive in a regular classroom where you're quietly putting your things down. We're just thrilled that everybody can be here. So without further ado, I really do want to just go back and start that lecture, but I did just want to point out that yes, we are. This is section 2. We are deep in the middle of 800 bajillion battles. So this is we've seen this video before, but it's a great rewind of what we were learning about when we met on Monday. So I'm going to play this 3-minute video. Let me know if you cannot hear it. And this will remind us of, kind of when last we left our intrepid generals in the army, this is what they were up against. And then I'll go on from there and try to finish what I've done today. So here we go.
In the spring of 1777, the British devise a plan to isolate New England from the other American colonies. 3 columns are ordered to converge on Albany, New York. 1 column is stopped at Fort Stanwix. 1 disregards the plan and instead moves toward Philadelphia, defeating an American force at the Battle of Brandywine and capturing the American capital. Washington attempts to recapture the city, but is defeated at the Battle of Germantown. Afterward, he moves his army to Valley Forge for the winter. The 3rd British column meets heavy resistance from partisan fighters, giving the Americans time to assemble a large force near Saratoga. The fighting at Saratoga rages from September to October. Victory sways in the balance. Finally, the Americans surround the British army and force them to surrender.
All right, so that was where we last left everybody, right? The Americans win in sort of northern New York. What Albany is now the capital of New York, up by Saratoga. The British Howe comes down and ignores the plan, comes down around and wins in Pennsylvania cities. He wins in Brandywine, he wins in Germantown, and he takes over Philadelphia. And sort of licking his wounds, Washington wingles off to Valley Forge for the winter and kind of winters there because nobody does anything exciting in the winter. And so that's kind of where we were leading up to this. Some wins up farther north, some losses there. So Washington is joined by Marquis de Lafayette. He was, if you have seen Hamilton, I think he is in there. Marquis de Lafayette is a French aristocrat. He's a military officer, and he joins Washington's staff too late to help out at Brandywine. But he really, really likes Washington. Like, really, this is a bromance for the ages. And he volunteers. He likes Washington so much that he volunteers to serve in the Continental Army for no pay. Granted, he's a rich French guy, but you know, he was like, hey, I'll help you out. The Continental Congress is like, that is fantastic. We won't pay you, but here's a title that will mean a lot to all of the military people in your life. So they give him a commission in 1777. This is when I started to be like, why are we in 1777 and we haven't talked about the Declaration of Independence yet? That's what triggered. I was triggered by this idea of, you know, why are we doing this? He and Washington were both Masons. A Masonic lodge is a like secret society. It's like a fraternity for grownups. They have secret handshakes. I actually don't know anything about it. I know somebody who is a Mason, but I know nothing about what they do because I am not a Mason, although that is, of course, what I would say if I in fact was a Mason and I was lying to you. But I don't even know if people who identify as women can be Masons. Unclear about that. But they were both Masons. That has come down the pike. Oh, there you go. Mr. Decker would like to know that his great grandfather was a Mason, but then he'll have to kill us all for knowing that. Not really, but kind of close. That's, you know, all those like National Treasure, like all the secret signs and everything. They're all Masonic stuff. Assassin's Creed kind of stuff. So he decides to help Marquis de Lafayette. He helped as a commander and as an advocate. Remember, he's a French aristocrat, and this is before the French Revolution. So the aristocrats are in power. I always want to say aristocrats, but the aristocrats are in power, and he becomes a liaison to help the French government believe in the cause and everything else. Right, this is, like I said before, we chopped off all, they chopped off all their heads and everything else. And fun fact, the Marquis de Lafayette actually named his only son after George Washington. Like I said, bromance for the ages. Okay, so speaking, remember, this was the British take over Philadelphia. You just saw this in the film. This is why I like those film clips, and that little blue rectangle moved off to Valley Forge to, you know, recoup and lick its wounds. So it's a really low time emotionally for the Continental Army and also physically, because it's flipping cold in Pennsylvania in the winter. The British are like, we're in Philadelphia. We have heat, we have a port, we have, you know, food, whatever we need, blah, 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 blah. And we're in your capital city. So haha, neener, neener. The Americans are like making do. Valley Forge is not really a city. It's like a town filled with log cabins, you know, not an actual sort of vibrant city in the 1700s. It's about 20 miles northwest of the city. You saw that on the map, that the blue box kind of went up. They were exposed to disease. They were hungry. It was flipping cold and snowy. They have no food. They have no medicine. The farmers who lived around here, this is, I believe, the Schuylkill River. It's not Schuylkill. They just are, you know, they're not convinced that the Americans are going to win. So they're like, wow, we don't want to be considered traitors to the crown. In fact, some of them are like, go around Valley Forge and come and sell their goods to the British who, you know, have money from England and stuff like that, around the edges. And the delegates from the Continental Congress are like, maybe we shouldn't have George Washington be the leader here, because maybe it should be Horatio Gates. He's the one up in Saratoga who's winning up in Saratoga. So they were like, maybe, you know, we should go with the winners and not the losers. Okay. But the situation slowly improves. Why does the situation slowly improve? Well, number one is they're there for the winter and people's friends and family come and visit them. Remember, the fighting has sort of stopped. So it's like a timeout and everybody can kind of come and go. The army is taken all from local recruits. So the local families come to, you know, here I brought you food, here I cooked you a meal, here's some wood, here's whatever. And the other thing they did is they took these 3 or 4 months and they practiced training them. Again, just reminds me of, you know, Mulan, that whole scene, I'll make a man out of you. They were reorganized. They trained in divisions. Remember, they kind of were this motley crew of people and they started to train. Who trained them? Well, there's this guy from Prussia, which is really kind of Germany and a little bit of Poland and like that area that, you know, like Russia and Germany, and everybody keeps fighting over that area. So this Prussian guy, he's a baron, he's royalty also, Baron Friedrich von Steuben, yes, Maureen, me too. He's a real general, and he comes in and he teaches them how to use weapons, and he teaches them how to fight better, and he develops military tactics, and not just like, hi, here's a gun, go shoot people, but whatever else. Actual icon. Not only that, he's gay and he's out, and it is 1777, and he is just like, this is who I am, and you're gonna, listen to me and everything else. Yes, people follow him everywhere. Washington loves him. The Lafayette loves, everybody else is loves him. I actually don't know enough about Hamilton the musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda, but I can't, why is he not in with this thing? So yay for June being Pride Month anyway. And then, mic drop. Here we have somebody who like literally helped train our troops. Yes, he was not only gay, he was out. He was not hiding that at all. That is hysterical. He swears in German. I did not know that, Mr. Decker. Okay, so Washington was like, yo, Continental Congress, Gage does not need to be in charge of this part of the army. I got you, fam. But, because I got Friedrich von Steuben there, and that is like, whatever. Yes, so I just want to throw that out there. Always awesome to have personalities in the mix of all of this, but like extra. Yes, that is correct. Okay. Meanwhile, not everybody was as cool. So the British who have occupied Philadelphia decide that they are going to actually leave Philly and head south. Now that's a weird flex to do because Philly's the capital, but I think their thought was, we could stay put and just kind of be at a stalemate, like you have, the northern half and we have Philadelphia. But I think the military strat was, we'll go south and we'll conquer the whole southern part of the colonies, because they thought that they were going to be able to win there easily. And the idea, I think, was that the British were going to like kind of just be like, look, granted, you won in Saratoga and like some, in Vermont, but who cares about Vermont? Like, we're basically winning everywhere else. Okay. They're aided by Benedict Arnold. Do you remember him? We said he was going to be a traitor to the United States, and he was. So he was the Fort Ticonderoga hero. He went with Ethan Allen. They conquered Fort Ticonderoga. That's going to let Fort Knox or Mr. Knox come in and take all the cannons and the war material out of there and bring it to Boston for the siege of Boston. He was also instrumental in helping the Americans win at the Battle of Saratoga, which is where Howe went down south and ignored it, and Burgoyne was the only one who fought there, et cetera, et cetera. So but he got wounded at Saratoga. And then he gets appointed as a commander in Philadelphia. But remember, the British are going to occupy Philadelphia. So he meets and marries a woman named Peggy Shippen, who was the daughter of a wealthy loyalist sympathizer. This reminds me a lot of PP in our Prudence Punderson in our art packet, except she marries a rebel and sort of, kind of Americanizes, like she doesn't convert. Peggy Shippen basically was like, hey, we have all these contacts who are British, and, they would really appreciate you way more than these Americans, and blah, 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 blah. And Benedict Arnold was ripe for the picking. He was frustrated because he was a business owner in Connecticut, but he'd lost all his business because he was busy fighting war and, nobody was buying his stuff. And he was resentful of the commanders in the Continental Army for not rising him through the ranks faster, right? He wanted to be a General Howe or a General Washington, and he was just Benedict Arnold, just a military commander. So he ends up getting to be a traitor. What else are we going to talk about here in this part of the packet? Well, let's talk about the Continental Navy. Now, remember, the British have a huge British Navy, right? They have naval battles that against like the Spanish Armada that are like legendary, wait for it, dairy, right? The Continentals have like 2.5 ships, most of which are like miniaturized rowboats. Not really, but like also, yeah, sort of. Okay, so the Americans are like, okay, we need a navy. We need to create a navy. So it gets officially created. We back up to 1775. The Continental Congress, while they're meeting in October, are like, we also have a navy. And John Adams is like, let's make a navy. And so they build a navy. They authorize 13 ships and 8 of them get built. So I want you to imagine, like if you've seen Top Gun, that the US right now has approximately 10 quadrillion ships, 8 of which started in the Marine. I saw the original Top Gun 14 times in the theater. I've had a crush on Tom Cruise since 1986. I went to go see, this is the first movie I've gone to see since COVID. Facts. Okay, so the Continental Congress is like, let's make a navy, and Washington the ships aren't built yet. So during the siege of Boston, literally Washington is like, are there any ships in the harbor that we could like throw a cannon onto and like turn it into a ship? So like a fighting ship. So he kind of does that. Mostly he's like, hey, ship owners, why don't you join us and like go harass the Navy, the British Navy, like away from port, like row out to them and yell at them and like make them go away. So they do that. Yes. What we ended up doing was hiring privateers. Yes, privateers is like a fancy, polite name for pirates. We literally go to owners, like it would be like saying to someone, oh, you'd like to make money driving a taxi service? Here, stick this sticker on the side of your car and then just pretend you're a taxi service. So literally the Continental Army goes to like a bunch of ship owners and are like, hi, do you want to just take your ship that you used to send over to England to get goods and instead go, you can work for us, and now you can work for us. They commission them as if they are naval ships. They are like, hey, you know what? For you, it's now legal to attack the British. I want you to imagine that like the police come up to you and are like, you know what's legal for you to do now? Carjack other people and just take their cars. You'd be like, rockin', I can't get in trouble for this. And they're like, no, here's a piece of paper. It says we let you do this. Okay, so they're like, rock on. So they basically did that. 1,700, remember they have 8 boats that are official Navy boats. 1,700, yes, exactly. 1,700 American privateers capture, and I love this line in the packet, they capture over 2,283 British ships. Why that specific number? And then why do you say over that number? Like, is it 2,284? Unclear why they don't just say over 2,200. No, 2,283 British ships valued at $66 million. They're like, hey, go forth. So that's what happened. The Continental Navy's mission was to guard American commerce, to make sure that Americans could still trade with other, like France and the Netherlands and everything else, and to raid British supply vessels so that the British did not get their supplies in. Okay, and then there was this Scottish guy called John Paul Jones, and John Paul Jones is a fabulous story. So he was Scottish, so technically he should have more or less been fighting under the British, right? Because that's the British Isles, often includes Scotland. Instead, he defected from there and joined the Continental Navy, of which we had nothing, took his own boat, You remember how we said you can go attack the British ships and like keep them from coming in and also protect our incoming goods? He literally took his own boat and sailed back across the Atlantic to waters that were owned by England, captured an English boat, the HMS Drake, in British waters and seized it. And yup, that is literally, he was a maverick. He is a literally like just amazing. Yeah, no, he did it, and he did it successfully. And later on, the British are like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, he's the maverick of our time. It is main character energy times 1,000. Okay, so let's talk about the European alliances. There are 3 countries that we need to talk about, right? Because it's England versus America, and then France gets involved. So France is still like, screw you, over the Treaty of Paris, which was the end of the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. So France was like, hey, we're still bitter from this treaty you made us sign literally 15 years ago that took away everything except the Caribbean from us. So kiss my bouquet. They didn't really care about American independence, but they really wanted to weaken the Brits because they were still bitter about all that stuff. And at first the colonists are like, I don't know if we want to let you in here, but honestly, money talks. So the Americans, after a little while, were like, you know what France has? Money, and also troops. So I guess we like you. Especially at the Battle of Saratoga. Remember, the Battle of Saratoga is won by the Americans. The British were like, look, we're fighting to a stalemate. Remember, the movie said it went on September and October. So it's months of fighting. And the British are like, look, how about a peace treaty? We really don't want to fight you. We just want to keep you as a colony. Let's treat. Let's have a treatise. The Carlisle Peace Commission was offered to the Americans. It offered home rule, but still under the British Empire. That is what the colonists had wanted, and America said no. So like 1775, America's like, we want our own rule, but we'll stay a colony. And then King George III was like, are you rebelling? And then we rebelled. And then they came back, Britain came back and was like, okay, look, how about we just give you what you want? And France was like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And so we didn't. Okay, there was a guy called Charles, I think it's Gravier. I have taken 0 French, so I'll let my mother chime in if I'm not saying that correctly. He was the French foreign minister. He was a count, Comte de Vergennes. He's a count. He was like, yeah, if America and Britain are happy with each other, France loses, just like we just lost in that stupid war. Instead, France should be America's primary trade partner here. Plus, we really want to keep the places that we have in the French West Indies, in the Caribbean off of the coast of Florida. It's our only North American holding that we have left, and we want to hold on to it. So he basically is like, hey, America, let us have a treaty between the two of us. It's like a backdoor treaty. A lot of this happened in like World War I and World War II, right? If you do this for me, I'll do this for you, and whatever else. So they Treaty of Amity and Commerce. The word amity means friendship, and commerce is trade. So France and America sign a trade agreement. Number one, like, we will trade with each other and cut out the British. And then number 2, they sign a treaty of alliance. And if you've studied World Wars I and II as well, you are well aware that when you have an alliance, right, you go to war if somebody else goes to war with you, right, you're going to be friendship and have each other's back. It established what they called a conditional and defensive alliance. So in other words, France supported America's bid for independence. America pledged that if war broke out between England and France because of this treaty, which had just happened in the 7 Years' War that was really 9 years long, that America would come to France's aid. And number 3, neither of them was going to make a treaty with Britain. This is the Germans do this as well, right? Like they'll agree to do some stuff and then like we won't sign with anybody else. So the French are like, you screw us over back then, we are going to double screw you over here. Okay, so European alliances, number one is France, and they're the big ones. Number two is Spain. Remember, Spain now owns legitimately 2/3 of what is going to become the United States of America when we, get the Louisiana Purchase and like that whole area. That nobody lives there but Native Americans, but Spain owns all of that, which is why in both Arizona and in California, half the population speaks Spanish. Spain joins the war halfway through 1779. So we declare war like 1775, 76, and 3 years later it ends in 81. But in 79, Spain comes on. They are an ally of France. Therefore, when France agrees to support America, they do too. This is a map of Spain. Up here, right to the north of Spain is France. So they are contiguous. My daughter is going here to Barcelona, right over here. Literally, she will be there tomorrow morning. Their main objective in getting involved in the American Revolution was, just like France, to hurt England. They let's damage British trade. They also want Gibraltar and Minorca back. Okay, so Spain has this history, and England, all of these European countries have this history of taking over like a speck of land somewhere, like something that's like the size of Stockdale High School, and like waging war about it. So literally, Spain owned 2 pieces of land and lost it 75 years before this war was declared. So like anybody who was involved in that war is now dead. Like literally, if they were fighting in that original war in 1704, they are now dead by 1780. The 2 pieces of land that they really wanted to fight over were Gibraltar and Minorca. Okay, Gibraltar is a rock at the tip of Spain. It is a rock. If you have it and Morocco, you can guard the neck of the Mediterranean Sea. But if you do not, and Spain did not have, spoiler alert, Spain does not have Morocco at this point. They just wanted it for name only. And Menorca, not to be confused with Mallorca, major and minor. Menorca is a really kind of small island over here in the corner. Like it's cute. It's like, I don't know, the size of Staten Island. It's flipping small. Okay, and they were like, dude, England, you stole those from us 75 years ago. I'm coming for you. Okay, so at first, all they did was the same thing that we did in World War I. They basically, and in World War II, they basically just lent us money. They also allowed American ships to enter the port of Havana, Cuba. This is why the people of Cuba speak Spanish, because it was owned by Spain. That you'll notice that we still have a rocky history. That's another 200 years, so fun for us. And it helped smuggling operations. Remember, it now owns what used to be French owned all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans. So I put up maps. This is the map of Spain. This is the map of Cuba. This sort of finger that's pointing down from the top, that's Florida. There's the lake in Florida that's right here, and the Bahamas, and the edge of Mexico. And in case you can't locate it, this bigger map, here's Florida, here's Cuba. It does not have the port of Havana on it, but here's Cuba. And this is like the piece of Mexico. Cancun is right here, kind of across from Cuba. There's not very much. It's about 90 miles from Key West to Cuba. It's about 100 miles to Cancun. So Spain is like, all right, look, we're not gonna like go to war necessarily right away, but we'll support you with, like sort of side operations. Once Spain finally officially enters the war halfway through, it helps on the western frontier, right? So the western frontier is like coming in from the side, from Louisiana and stuff like that, all up and down the Mississippi River. And rivers are huge, as we all know, in trade. They had held it since the 7 Years' War, so that was sort of not a no-brainer for them. And there ends up being a big battle of St. Louis that they don't say very much about. But basically, British and their Native American allied forces attacked in 1780, and Spain repels them. So they help win some battles here and there. So this is, I thought, a great cartoon. Right here's Great Britain thinking it could get away with the United States, but it gets Spain and France along the way. Okay, and finally, the Netherlands, which is also the Dutch Republic, like where Amsterdam is. If you follow soccer, they wear orange. I literally was like, the Netherlands was involved in the American Revolution. And like the part of me that grew up in New York City has some vague recollection of the fact that like Manhattan was under Dutch rule for a long time, which I mostly know because my rival high school was named after Peter Stuyvesant, who was a Dutch explorer and, you know, was the one who bought Manhattan Island from the Manhattan Indians for $28 in wampum. But like, really, like, I really thought that that like ended in like 1650 or something. So apparently, even with a master's degree in American studies, I don't know this. It was, the packet calls the Dutch Republic the European nation most aligned with the ideals of the American Republic. So if you remember, Britain and France, or France and Spain just want to hurt England monetarily and trade-wise. And the Dutch are like, your ideals are our ideals. That's because, are you ready for this? In 1588, AKA 190 years before any of this is happening, the Dutch rebelled against the Spanish and created an independent confederation of provinces that lasted until after this American Revolution was over in 1795. So they were like, 200 years ago, we fought for our freedom. You can do it too. I believe in you. So they helped the young American colonies circumvent the Navigation Act. So if you remember, the Navigation Acts were the ones where the British were like, okay, this is, you know, we own you, we have a monopoly over you, right? That whole East India Tea Company kind of thing. The Americans got around it by basically shipping everything to the Netherlands, to the Dutch colonies, and then the Netherlands resold them to all of Europe for us, like tobacco and indigo, which I only know as a plant that makes the color blue, but that's what I think it is. They also helped the French get around the British were embargoing the naval ports and things like that. And so they were able to help the French get around the blockades and things like that. And the British were extra sad because they thought they were the Dutch allies from 100 years after they rebelled against the Spanish. They were like, we're friends, right? And then the Dutch were like, no, we're not. And the British were so annoyed that it led to a war after our war was over, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, which I had never heard of 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right. What time is it? 4:43. Perfect. I'm going to finish the slides I have, and then we will be taking our break and we will turn to our art piece, the end of section 2 in art. Okay, so we talked about the rebellious North. If you see the word rebellious, the answer is like Massachusetts and points north. Then we talked about the stalemate in the center where like Philly gets won by the British, but and they win at Brandywine but we win in New Jersey. So, you know, in the middle, there's, you know, some wins and some losses for both sides. And in the South, it's funny, the subtitle of this section is The Civil War, which is not going to actually happen in American culture for another 100 years. But in other words, there were issues in the South. The British thought it was going to be a slam dunk to come into the South, but they were wrong. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. Why did they think it was going to be so easy? Well, number one is the South had more money back then. The tobacco was a crop that was insane here and making everybody money. And so there were a lot of rich people who kind of liked the status quo. If you're in forensics, you know, the SQ, the SQO, if you like it, if you're benefiting from it, you don't want to change it, right? Things are working under the SQO, under the status quo. so all the British also thought that there were a lot of the status quo was the norm, like what's happening right now. So the Southerners were pretty happy, and the British thought that there were a lot of British loyalists there. So they were like, hey, we're just going to march in, and you're going to be like, woohoo, yay, British, come into my world. And then that's going to be it. The colonists are going to have no purchase. So they developed a strategy called the Southern Strategy. Basically, they were going to try to squeeze the northern colonies, the Massachusetts, Vermont, all that really northern part of New York, between Canada and the Ohio Valley up at the top, and the South. And the South are Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia, like in this map. Don't worry about the battles yet. Just those are the South. So they're going to squeeze down into this center area. Okay. Unfortunately for the British, and also horrifyingly for anybody in modern times, slaves made it more complicated. Why? Well, South Carolina's delegates go to the Continental Congress and they're like, we would be happy to give you volunteers to help support the rebellion against the British, but, and this is a direct quote, we need a great proportion of citizens to remain at home to prevent insurrection among the Negroes and to prevent the desertion of them to the enemy. We can't give you soldiers because we need to keep our slaves enslaved, and we need people to force them to stay slaves, because if we don't, they will up and rebel and they will join the British themselves, which is so repulsive. Like, I can't, you know what? You should have all just gone. Like, how it's like nauseating, and it's especially nauseating, in the era of Black Lives Matter, to think that the South Carolina's patriots were like, oh, sorry, we have to keep people enslaved because of the color of their skin. That's what we're going to do. We can't help this cause because, we have to keep citizens home. We have to have a huge number of men at home to prevent the Negroes from insurrection, from fighting up against everything. Even if the Black soldiers joined the Continental Army in the early days of the war, people were all weirded out by it. The colonial legislatures and the Continental Congress were wary of accepting them. In fact, even George Washington, slave owner, initially opposed the inclusion of Black soldiers. It was too hard for their little pea brains to be able to see them as full men and women. They were, these slaves, they were lesser than everything else. So England, finger crack, sees an opportunity. This guy called John Murray, who's Lord Dunmore, he's the last governor of Virginia who is loyal to England rather than self-elected by the Virginians. He makes a proclamation that gets called Dunmore's Proclamation. And he's like, hey, people of color who are enslaved, if you leave your patriot enslavers, if you run away and come join the British Army, we'll give you freedom. Boom, you're free. You're never a slave again. 1775. Makes me really wish the British had won, honestly. Like, that's the thing. He formed the Ethiopian Regiment because apparently Ethiopia is synonymous with them to Black slavery. I don't know. Like, literally, I guess that was the only country they could name in all of Africa. So they became the Ethiopian Regiment. 1,000 formerly enslaved men volunteered, led by British officers. Dunmore's proclamation freed them. And the Americans were like, damn, that is problematic for us. So they started to recruit enslaved persons a little bit more. Eventually, 5,000 Black soldiers served with the Continental Army and Navy. Some of them are in integrated units, meaning whites and Blacks fought next to each other and together. And many of them distinguished themselves with military action, hoping, honestly, that they would be freed at the end of this. This is part of what drives India's movement for independence in 1948, because 200 years, 150 years later, India's like, yo, we fought for you in World War II and we're still second-class citizens. this is not happening. Luckily, they were able to do it in a somewhat bloodless revolution to break free of their colonialism, and all these other countries followed suit. But that was not the case here. We like the South keeps, slavery for another 90 years. But the prejudice keeps up. Some of them fight and are actual soldiers, but a lot of them are not allowed, let's say, guns or the chance to lead, and are instead sort of do menial jobs, cleaning up and whatever else, continuing to be slaves essentially, but for the army. The British were like, yo, Dunmore didn't go far enough. So Sir Henry Clinton, funny enough, my college, Hamilton College, is in Clinton, New York, and a rival high school that was like for sports right next door to us was also Clinton High School. So Clinton, kind of a good guy Brit, he takes over for General Howe in 1779. That's the guy who keeps not destroying George Washington's army when he has a chance. He not only took Dunmore's proclamation and was like, hey, if you come fight for us, we'll free you. He extends it, and it becomes the Phillipsburg Proclamation. He basically is like, look, if you're Black, you're a free person now. Doesn't matter if you belong to an American patriot, I am declaring you free. Doesn't matter your age, your gender, whether you're joining the British military or not, you're free. Under my rule, you're free. And we'll give you, if you leave now and you leave your patriot enslavers, I'll give you protection, freedom, land. Just leave. Why? Because then he gets a desertion of everybody. Like there'll be nobody left to fight, right? Because he's like, here, have a plot of land that doesn't belong to him, that belongs to the Native Americans, but I digress. So many fled to freedom with the British, 5,000 people from Georgia alone, the total number of Blacks who joined the war in 5 years for the Patriot cause, that Clinton was like, damn, yeah, some of you have to go back, which is like the other saddest thing. Yeah, we have a quota. I mean, oh my God, how terrible, how terrible. Okay, this is my last slide, and then we will take a break. The packet talks about the siege of Savannah. Nothing happens here. I have no idea why this is its own paragraph. I feel like if I were the editor here, I would be like, you know what? We don't need to know about the siege of Savannah, because yeah, that's a thing. So basically Savannah is in Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, the British capture it. The guy who's in charge is called Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Campbell. He captures it on December 29th, 1778, with about 3,000 British soldiers. Americans and French try to take the city back the next year in October. So 10 months pass with nothing doing. The American's name is General Benjamin Lincoln. I don't think related to Abraham Lincoln, but you never know. The French are led by Charles Hector, who is also a count. There's only 3,000 British soldiers. They bring somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 Americans and 4,000 French soldiers. So there's about 10,000 troops, Americans and French combined, that are trying to take it back from these 3,000 British soldiers. But the smaller British force won. The French commander hightails it out of there. Lincoln retreats, and Savannah stays British. Now you know everything I know about the siege of Savannah. Doesn't seem at all important to me. All right, so that is the end of my lecture for today. I'm going to stop my share, and in 1 second, we got up to the siege of Savannah is on page 29 to the top of page 30. The page 29 to the top of page 30, and I stopped right before the real nitty gritty of Benedict Arnold, really being the traitor that he became. My goal for next week, if you're following along, is to finish the rest of section 2, which goes to page 41. So I have about 10 pages left. I don't think there will be any problem trying to do this. And so it is 4:56. Let's break till 5:05. 5:05. I'm going to pause the recording. I got told I pause the recording, and then I say, let's pause the, and then I come like, now we're back. So I'm going to pause the recording. And when we come back in 10 minutes, although I still have my tea, so I won't be going anywhere. we will finish section 2 of this, the art with a piece that you all know. So, all right, pausing the recording. I have started the recording again. Let's see if that works better this time. If the people on Discord are talking about that. All right, so I am going to turn it over. I forgot to make Mr. Decker the co-host, which I always like to do in case it, like, my internet goes out or anything like that. I will be running the chat, and Decker will be taking it away with the very last of the portraits. And you will know this. To know him is maybe not to love him, but you will know this last portrait. Every single one of you, for the first time ever, I think I can say that this is I am absolutely convinced that every single one of you has seen this portrait. Perfect. And I will put this up. Excellent.
And I will preface this by saying you've seen the head of the last portrait. And then we'll move on from there. Yeah, but don't lose your head over it. But let's see. So before we get into the portrait, we're going to talk about several portraits here. And we're going to talk about one's Gilbert Stuart, born in Newport, Rhode Island in 1755. His father was a Scottish immigrant who found work in the manufacture of snuff. Snuff can either be wet or dry, powdered or scrunched up leafy tobacco. And you can either put a pinch of it, a wet pinch of it between your cheek and gums, or you can sniff it up your nose. And I guess that's how I went down a small detour rabbit hole reading about the etymology of the word snuff. And it's basically sniff, but you're sniffing this powder, so you're snuffing it. Well, whatever. Okay. Anyway, it was a big deal, right? If you didn't want to smoke and get it all in the fabric, you can snuff it. You get that nicotine high, basically. Gilbert apprenticed with a local limner. Remember what a limner is? It's an artist. Left America to study art in England in 1777. Why do you have everybody going from America to England to study art? This is not the first, and it won't be the last person that does so. Well, it's because, again, we're not a country yet, even though we've declared independence in 1776. They're fighting the war. So we're not a country, and we don't have any art academies here or art schools. We don't have any music schools. We don't have anything that, if you're a member of the fine arts, to study over here. Nobody with any musical training, nobody with any artistic training. All the teachers are, think about it. Most music teachers and art teachers didn't say, hey, let's go across the Atlantic Ocean and ply our trades in these colonies where they don't really need music or art education. It just wasn't something to do yet. So everybody who wanted to be a serious artist or musician went to Europe. When Gilbert Stuart goes to Europe, he hooks up with Benjamin West. We talked about him before. Benjamin West was the man that told Jonathan Singleton Copley to come to England. He so far has been mentioned in 3 of the 5 artists of section 2, and he is one of our artists later on in either section 3 or 4. Oh, big deal. Remember, Benjamin West helped found the Art Academy in England, London. West was mentor, advisor, and instructor to an entire generation of American artists. He even provided financial assistance to some of the artists, including Gilbert Stuart. By the way, the fact that United States of America, even after the war, we have, and I'll say we, because this is where we're at, a giant inferiority complex. This inferiority complex applies to artists. They say, you guys can't create any great art over there. Musicians, you don't have any great music coming out from over there. You don't have anybody writing great music. And literature, you don't have any great authors out there. And that's actually one of the reasons that the book that we're reading this year that was published in 1796, I think, or 98, 1796 or 8, by Brown. That's why he wrote it and why they consider him the America's first Gothic author. So big inferiority complex. We don't have any fine arts. We don't have any literature. We don't have any music. So this theme runs throughout the curriculum this year. And that didn't advance it. Let's see if that advanced. There we go. Okay. So over in Europe, Gilbert Stuart has a big success. He establishes a critical reputation when he exhibits the skater. And this is the skater. Yeah, pretty cool. If I try to skate like this, I would fall on my you-know-what. You see these other people are skating, and this is quite unique. I shouldn't say quite unique because that would be redundant. Unique means one of a kind, so quite one of a kind is silly. So I'll just say it's unique. They don't usually have action portraits of people, okay? So this is different. Stuart exhibits the skater at the Royal Academy in 1782, featuring feathery, loose, impressionistic brushwork. Even though it's not an impressionistic painting, it's got elements of that, we'll put it that way. And to really understand the isms, we have to go back to section 1. And I will give a big lecture all on section 1 when we're done with the art packet. I'm going to come back and give you guys that, probably in a couple months. Grays and blacks dominate the composition and accentuate the pink of the man's skin. Stuart suggested the sitter pose in ice skates to appear active yet poised. Showed the influence of British portraitists, including Joshua Reynolds, Thomas Gainsborough, and George Romney. First, I want to do a bigger look at the skater here. Again, this is not one of our specific works that we're going to be studying, but it's kind of fun. If you blow it up and you can move it around, you can see the details in the background, because really there's so much interesting stuff. And this is where you can see some of the impressionistic brush strokes in how he did the background. It's not a finely detailed landscape painting. You sort of got an impression of the background here. That's the idea there, and sort of an impression of that. There more focused details, but like these people don't really quite have faces. So of course, if you get closer, you get more and more details. And of course, there's a lot of details in the face of the sitter, but we'll call him the stander. By the way, these full figured portraits, this is one of the hallmarks of the grand manner style. We've talked about the difference between Elizabethan and grand manner style when we talked about an earlier artist. And when, oops, there we go. When we say that this work by Stuart showed the influence of British portraitists, influence means, I can't do a direct quote of art, but like I can a sentence, right? If I'm reading something in a book, I can take it out, and if I'm writing something, I can put quotation marks around it. And here's a quote, exactly what this person said, right? You're not doing that exactly in art, but you can certainly use a lot of the same artistic ideas, and that's what we mean by showing the influence of. So they don't have George Romney in this clip, but they do have Reynolds and Gainsborough, and these are typical of what we're calling the grand manner portraits. And that did not go to the right link. Did I put the wrong link in there? Uh-oh, I've got two of the same one. That's disturbing. Well, you know what? It should be down here. There we go. It's a way of getting there, but it should have gone directly to here. So I don't know why it didn't. This one on the left, I think this is, in fact, it says down here, Reynolds and Gainsborough. So this is a work by Reynolds, Sir Joshua Reynolds. This is by Gainsborough. And again, full-bodied I don't mean full-bodied women. I mean full-bodied portraits rather than just a bust. Typically, when we think of portraits, we think of Elizabethan style, which is usually just busts of people, chest up type of thing. These are full body portraits. Some of these portraits are like 8 feet tall. And sometimes in these full manner styles, they would have a more natural setting with trees and flora and fauna. And sometimes they'd have more of a classical setting with columns and draperies and a hint of landscape in the background, which isn't the same as full landscape. So again, this is called grand manner or great style to describe paintings that utilized visual metaphors. By extension, the grand manner came to include portraiture, especially at full length and in life size. So if you met these people, they'd be roughly the same size as their pictures, their portraits. Accompanied by settings and accessories that conveyed the dignified status of the sitters. Classical architecture signifies one's civilized demeanor, whereas woodland glens implied sincerity, natural sincerity. So, and people at the time would know that's what this means. And now artists at the time didn't come up with this on their own. Just like Stuart was influenced by Reynolds and Gainsborough and Romney, those artists were influenced by ancient Roman and Greek architecture and painting and whatever. The postures and gestures in grand manner portraits often derive from ancient Roman sculpture or Italian Renaissance paintings. Another precedent was early 17th century English court portraiture by the two Flemish masters knighted by King Charles I, one Sir Peter Paul Rubens and the other one Sir Anthony van Dyck. The connoisseur, meaning you as a viewer, was expected to appreciate these artistic sources and their subtle references, just as educated readers were assumed to recognize authors' quotations from earlier literature. So that's the idea. Anyone who's educated would say, oh, that's in the manner of Gainsborough. Oh, and there you go. Success of the skater led to numerous commissions and made Stuart lots of money. But he always, no matter how much money was coming in, he found a way to spend more than was coming in. Extravagant lifestyle led to huge debts, which led him to flee for Ireland. He does this in about 5-year increments. He wears out his welcome in England. 5 years later, he goes to Ireland. He wears out his welcome in Ireland and he flees to Philadelphia. 1793, nice little 5-year increments. It's Stalin's 5-year plans. No, sorry, going back to earlier Decathlon lectures from literally 10 years ago. So Philadelphia at the time, we talked about, was it General Gage or was it General Howe? Yeah, it was General Howe. He was pissed off and he went and attacked Philadelphia instead of going back. So I'm linking it to the stuff at the time. So Philadelphia, the US's largest city, by now we are talking about the US, so it's 1793, and it's our nation's temporary capital. It's perfect timing. As we've become a new nation, we need a logo. We don't have a Nike swoosh. We don't have Jerry West moving on the basketball court. We don't, okay, we need a trademark, okay? We need iconic imagery, okay? Artists and craftsmen have been tasked with building a new image for our nation to help unify the regional factions and colonies. Remember that picture that Mrs. Scully put up, a couple of weeks ago, Benjamin Franklin, it's a snake and it's all cut apart, and each of the parts of the snake were different colonies. It's like, yeah, we got to stick together. We're a new country. New countries could easily fall apart. Old countries can easily fall apart. So we need something that will link us all together. So this is great. This is perfect. He's new. He's got 5 years to plunder. I mean, get commissions. And by the way, I went down the Gilbert Stuart rabbit hole. He was really a good painter, but he didn't keep good records and he didn't keep receipts. And he sometimes would get money from people and then forget that he got money from them, and he'd ask for money again. So he'd double bill people. And sometimes one person would pay him a commission, but he hadn't finished a previous commission. And so the money that you paid me for this commission, I used that to paint a painting and give it to the old person. And the new person's going, well, where's my painting? And the old person, it took him years to get it. This guy was just not a good businessman and loved to spend money. So Martha Washington, she wants really good painters to paint George, and a lot of artists have painted George. I mean, he gets so tired of sitting, but we'll get to that. Washington elected and sworn as president in 1789. It's now 4 years later, and Martha wants a portrait done. Stuart painted more than 100 portraits of Washington between 1795 and 1825, helping to develop a unified iconography for the new republic. So many portraits, they've come to be distinguished by their alternate titles. Like, here's a picture of Washington by Stuart. Here's another picture of Washington by Stuart. Here's another picture of Washington by Stuart. So we're going to name them. So we have this various names. The Athenaeum portrait is the most recognizable. You've all seen a copy. You've all got a copy on you. These days, people don't handle money. But if you do have money, there's George. This is the Athenaeum portrait. So named because the Boston Athenaeum acquired it shortly after Stuart died. It's jointly owned by the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and the National Portrait Gallery of Washington, D.C. Now, this is really the portrait, right? This is simply, remember how I told you how engravings work. An engraver looks at a picture of someone, and either on a zinc or copper plate, they scratch, they dig into the metal, and then they ink those lines that are dug into the metal. So an engraver, we don't know who engraved this. An engraver looks at the face here of George Washington, and they make a template for it. They make a literal plate. They put ink in it. They put paper on that. And if you've got lots of plates and lots of paper, you make lots of money. And there you go. Reproduce more than any other image because it's on the dollar bill. It's been modified a few times over the 250 years, but it's still on the dollar bill. So this is literally the most reproduced image in the world, as far as anyone can tell. The original painting by Stuart was never finished, because if he finished it, he'd have to give it to her. There's several stories about this, saying Martha had been trying for so long to get him to finish the painting. She said, I'll just take it unfinished. She even brought George with her. So there's the president and wife of the United States of America, the first president, and they're in his studio, and Stuart won't give him the painting. Why won't he give them the painting? Well, because he used this as a model. According to Packett, he copied this portrait more than 60 times. We think he copied it a lot more than that. He referred to these works, his copies, as his $100 bills, not knowing that it would eventually wind up on the $1 bill. He calls this his $100 bills because that's how much he's selling this copy of the original one that he never finished. $100 a bill, a shot. $100 250 years ago is a lot of money. 250, well, anyway, never mind. The neutral background gives the painting a timeless quality. Washington was said to have a pale complexion, like pale would be like his forehead pale. And they would think, well, gee, we'll make the whole thing pale. But Stuart portrays him as pink-skinned, and slightly ruddy. So I had to look up ruddy, and that's my snuff picture. I got to go back to my ruddy. Yes, if you describe someone's face as ruddy, you mean that their face is a reddish color, usually because they are healthy or have been working hard, or because they are angry or embarrassed. There were multiple other definitions. I went with that one. In a minute, we're also going to talk about Washington's aquiline nose, that Stuart emphasizes his aquiline nose and sober, direct expression. Aquiline from the Latin word meaning eagle. Bird, eagle, United States, eagle, country's bird, okay. George Washington, first president, aquiline, eagle, nose, there you go. Most often used to describe a nose that has a broad curve and is slightly hooked like a beak, also called a Roman nose. Things I never knew before. His eyes look lively and active. I'll take their word on it. Pursed lips suggest discipline and self-control. They use this same description to describe Phyllis Wheatley, the African-American slave poet, and the picture of her, she is described as having pursed lips, and that means she's being very thoughtful and she's thinking about what she's going to write. So pursed lips is a big deal in the art world, I guess. And Stuart tried to emphasize the qualities that the new chaotic country needed, including moderation, restraint, and resolve. There is a famous quote by a critic who they do not name, so I won't get in. I didn't go down the rabbit hole trying to find out who exactly said this, but this person said, though a better likeness of him, meaning George Washington, were shown to us, we should reject it. For the only idea that we now have of George Washington is associated with Stuart's Washington. This is not the portrait that we're studying. The part that we're studying is more in the grand manner style, and it's full bodied, it's head to toe, 8 feet tall. But there's a part of this that does appear in that portrait. And let me, oh, I already went there. Did I already go there? Wait, I don't think I did. There we go. It's the Athenaeum portrait, and if you click on it, there you go. You can blow it up, but I don't think it looks. This is not the one that we can blow up a whole lot. Yeah, I just had a link on there just so people could see it. Okay, my bad. I forget what I've done sometimes. So, which brings us to this one, which is not the Athenaeum portrait, it's the Lansdowne portrait. Wait a minute. Pale but ruddy complexion, aquiline nose. This very, very similar. Okay, this is really the head from the Athenaeum portrait that's on the dollar bill. Dollar bill's reversed because, of course, whoever etched this didn't try to do it mirror image, and so he's looking the other way. Just saying. Okay, this is known as the Lansdowne portrait, commissioned by Senator William Bingham of Pennsylvania as a gift to the Marquis of Lansdowne, now owned by the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. The Marquis of Lansdowne, he was a great supporter of the Revolutionary War. So they wanted to, the senator wanted to give him a gift for his past support. Now owned by the National Portrait Gallery. I'm going to show you a little clip on here. Stuart made 3 copies. Well, actually, I'm going to show you the clip first. Maybe they'll talk about that. Maybe they won't. I can't remember which one I want to. I think I want to give you this one first. Yes, I do, by golly. Do they have a commercial?
Curator of painting and sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery, Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. I'm standing here at the National Portrait Gallery in front of Gilbert Stuart's portrait of George Washington, known as the Lansdowne portrait. It was painted in 1796 at the end of Washington's presidency, and it is perhaps the most iconic image of Washington painted during his lifetime. It's the first portrait of Washington where he's shown as a citizen rather than a military leader. He's wearing the velvet suit that he was known to wear at public appearances. He's posed in an oratorical pose with his arm outstretched, addressing the public. It was painted as a commission for the Lord of Lansdowne, William Petty, who was a great supporter of the American cause as a British citizen. It was commissioned by William Bingham, who wanted to give William Petty a gift from the United States, and it was sent to London after it was painted in Philadelphia. The portrait of Washington is filled with important symbols referencing the New Republic. There's a flag with 13 stripes in the medallion in the back of the chair. The quill on the table next to Washington is held in a well that is the shape of an arc, and the Washington family symbol is imprinted on the well. Books surround Washington, including the Constitution, rainbow in the background referencing the end of the war and hope for a brighter future. Gilbert Stuart made multiple copies of the Lansdowne portrait. This is the original. He made a copy for William Bingham, who had commissioned the original portrait. He also made another copy for William Constable, who was an Irish-born New York merchant. Those copies are now in the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and the Brooklyn Museum. He made other copies. One of those copies attributed to Gilbert Stuart is in the White House. That portrait was rescued by Dolly Madison during the War of 1812 when the British invaded Washington and burned the city. Dolly Madison was left in the White House by James Madison when he went to meet the troops in the field in preparation for the British invasion. She realized that she needed to take account of the most important objects in the White House, in her view, and this version of our Lansdowne portrait was one of those important objects. As legend has it, it was taking such a long time to remove the portrait in its frame from the wall that she ordered the frame to be broken and had the portrait rolled and carried away from the White House by two men from New York, who she writes about to her sister in a letter documenting this event. Gilbert Stuart's Lansdowne portrait is the focal point of the National Portrait Gallery's America's President's Gallery. It was a generous gift from the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation in 2001. And the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation made it possible to share this iconic portrait with American people and visitors from all over the world who come to learn about the first president at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington. It is fitting that we are talking about Gilbert Stuart's Lansdowne portrait of George Washington at this time as we approach the 200th anniversary of Dolly Madison's
that's the most pertinent stuff
rescue
there.
Of the version of this.
It's this was made like 10 years ago. It's a little bit out of date, but that's okay. So as she said, Stuart made 3 copies. One is hung in the East Room in the White House since 1800. Still there. That's the one that was rescued from destruction by Dolly Madison and the Packases and Paul Jennings, slave, just before the burning of Washington in the War of 1812. She was left in the house with, she wasn't alone, she had servants and everything, and she got a lot of things out of there. One thing I wanted to point out was that this article on Dolly Madison rescues George Washington and the painting and the burning of Washington. That's what they call that time, the burning of Washington. Rescue painting no simple feat. The 8-foot tall portrait was bolted to the wall of the dining room, making it difficult to move or transport, according to Paul Jennings. Now that's what the art packet mentions, that Dolly Madison, Paul Jennings. Well, according to this, Paul Jennings was a teenage footman enslaved by the Madisons, and steward John Susat and gardener Thomas McGaw were instructed by Mrs. Madison to hack away at the portrait's frame. Once the painting was free, it was turned over to 2 New Yorkers, Jacob Barker and Robert G.L. DePaster, for safekeeping. So, and she also said, while preserving the portrait was important, Mrs. Madison felt it was equally critical that it not be allowed to be confiscated by the British. She instructed the men to destroy the painting before turning it over, admonishing them not to allow it into the hands of the enemy, as their capture would enable them to make a great flourish. And the documentation of all this is from letters written by Dolly Madison to friends and her husband and things like that. So kind of a depiction of them hurrying and getting everything out of the house. Many copies of the original Lansdowne portrait were made by Gilbert Stuart and other artists of his era. In fact, there were lots of copiers. So we didn't have really strict laws on copywriting things and always quoting things in art anyway. So a lot of people copying things and selling them, saying that they were done by Stuart. He kind of got ticked off over that. When you examine the two versions of the same painting presented below, differences between the original and copies are immediately apparent. And then art historians have carefully analyzed the portrait over the years and have developed interesting theories and interpretations. The version on the left is a copy of the original, which is shown on the right. This particular copy, provided courtesy of the White House Historical Association, is the version rescued by Dolly Madison. So this is the one that's still in the White House. This is the one that he originally made. So this was a copy. The one on the left here is the one that was saved by Dolly Madison. If you notice, the rainbow is not as vibrant here. It looks like he's got his cheeks more puffed out than over here. In going down my rabbit hole, reading about Gilbert Stuart and his attempts to get George Washington to get into conversation during the long hours of sitting for the paintings, he said that after a certain time, well, first of all, Washington was reticent to get into conversation. There was nothing that Stuart had to say that was of any interest until he told a joke about some English general and then started talking about farming. He was interested in horses and farming. But you see that the hand here is puffier. Oh, I was going to say the cheeks are puffed out. In Stuart's writings, he said that Washington, the second time he came to see him, or third time later on, after he'd done this portrait, which he thought was so great, he had false teeth. He had false teeth put in. They didn't quite fit right. And that could, of course, make your face look exceedingly different. There's some other minor details here and there. The original here just looks so much more finished up close than the copy does. Again, Stuart was running them off as fast as he could. Replicas painted by Stuart are on display in the East Room of the White House, the Old State House in Hartford, Connecticut, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts Museum. The copy Mrs. Madison rescued still hangs in the White House. Love going down that rabbit hole. This portrait is a clear depiction of Washington as a leader. She mentioned in the video, Stuart used the Athenaeum portrait as a model for the head, but drew upon other sources for the body and pose. So what are those other sources? Where does he get this? The grand manner style. And remember, we talked about columns and drapery in the background. Well, let's take a look at that. He's standing with an upraised arm, signaling his intention to make a public address, common in ancient Roman statues of Republican senators. The packet says I call this the might, could, and or section of my lecture. This way that he's standing with his arm outstretched, it's like I'm a friends, Romans, countrymen. No, different address, but you got the. This might be a reference to an address he delivered to Congress in December of 1795. Could be bidding the nation goodbye. This was painted not long before his farewell address to the nation was published. Or maybe he's gesturing towards the nation's future, full of hope and all that. We don't know. It is likely that Stuart based Washington's pose here on a 1723 engraving by Pierre Drevet. This engraving is of the Bishop Jacques Benin Bousset after a work by Rigaud. I call this the too many names part of the art resource guide. This is literally the first sentence on the top page 63. Based on a pose of a 1723 engraving by Pierre Drevet, the artist, of Bishop Jacques Benin Bousset after a work by Rigaud. Even the background's the same. It's like, well, let's take a look. before I go and take a look on this link, look at the column with the drapery here and some open sky in the background, and some stuff over here, the rainbow over here, more drapery, the chair here, the table here, and we'll go to the 1723 engraving. We're talking 200 and, no, not 200. This would be 70, 73 years later. Boom. There we go. Look at that. Look at that. Big column in the background. Open sky over here. No rainbow, but we got cloudy skies. Same triangular cloud here, another column here with the sashes over here. I mean, it's the table over here, the quill pen, the books underneath here. They're more trashy looking, but chair over, you get the idea. This is the Bishop Jacques Benin Bousset, and it's done in the manner after a work by Rigaud. And it's made by Humbert Drevet. Hyacinth Rigaud is so Hyacinth Rigaud would have painted a painting, and then Drevet would have made an engraving. This is an engraving. If you look really closely, you see all the lines that have been scratched into the metal, either the zinc or copper plating, right? It's the same way they made the dollar bill, right? You're putting ink in here, right? So Drevet was an engraver. He copied a painting by Hyacinth Rigaud of the bishop here. And now we've come full circle. We've got George Washington by Stuart. The same triangular space here, the same sashes from the drapery. The drapery isn't blowing in the wind because it's not stormy. Remember, the rainbow depicts hope for the future. We've got this quill and the books over here, not all falling apart. Ceremonial sword. We're going to get more details here, but just pointing all those out immediately. Even the background is the same. Washington, this is Washington the ruler, not the general. A lot of famous artworks. Here's Napoleon on his horse. Here's this general so-and-so. Here's it. You know, this is General Washington no more. This is President Washington, the leader. The books on the table and the floor, they specifically mention the Constitution, volumes of the Federalist, and journals of Congress. Underscoring President's studious commitment to leading the country, quill pen and inkwell might refer to Washington's signing bills into law. Symbols of the new nation are scattered about the room. Emblem of the 13 stars and stripes in a medallion on the back chair. This is oval-shaped medallion here. Bald eagles, there's two of them, carved into the legs of the desk. The eagles are clutching bundles of arrows with their talons, indicating their readiness for war. Eagles and arrows were symbols of the Iroquois Confederacy, the organizing body of the Six Nations, which suggests the ways in which the Continental Congress appropriated the political structure of the Six Nations when they unified the 13 colonies. Discussed this in the social science packet a couple weeks ago. The table legs resemble fasces, bundles of rods intended to symbolize power and authority in ancient Rome. Classical columns in the background ties the emerging nation to Greek democratic ideals. The columns and the drapery as a backdrop, common in European grand manner portraits. Here's Hyacinth Rigaud's 1701 portrait of Louis XIV, because they mentioned this. It says, the drapery and the columns can be seen in Hyacinth Rigaud's 1701 portrait of Louis XIV and Anthony van Dyck's 1636 portrait of Charles I. So first we'll look at Rigaud's portrait of Henry XIV. It's this one, Henry showing off his gams, his great legs. Remember, men wear heels and hose and wigs way before women did. Louis XIV's court adored Hyacinth Rigaud, who helped to formulate what a state portrait should be. While Rigaud made a credible likeness of the king, his purpose was not to express Louis's character, but to glorify the monarchy. His original portrait of Louis XIV of 1701, now in the Louvre, was so popular that Rigaud had many copies made, both in full and half-length formats, often with the help of assistants. In this portrait from Rigaud's workshop, Louis XIV's ceremonial robes, elegant stance, and haughty expression proclaim his exalted status. Despite the vast expanse of canvas he covered, Rigaud remained concerned with the particular, describing the king's costume in great detail, even down to his shoe buckles. So it's Washington in a similar important style, but not emphasizing monarchy, emphasizing independence of the country and the fact that he's not a general ruler. Now we look at Anthony Van Dyck's 1636. So we're talking, 160, 170 years earlier, portrait of Charles I. And only reason I wanted to bring this up is, again, columns and drapery. Columns and drapery. That's what we're really looking at here. Full figure detail, yeah, we got a whole horse. We got two people in here, but it's not the horse that's important here. It's the fact that these columns and drapery are what help Stuart come to his ideas of columns and drapery in the background. Though referencing engravings of religious figures, meaning the bishop, portraits of royalty like Louis XIV and Charles I, ancient Roman statues, the columns, the drapery, Stuart makes clear that Washington is a democratically elected leader, not a royal figure. Again, emphasizing sober, understated demeanor, simple dark clothing, the black suit of a citizen leader, not special attire. He would wear this a lot out to functions, from what I read. Sheathed sword at his side, ceremonial reminder he is the head of the nation's military. Dark clouds dissipating in the background, rainbow emerging, suggesting the presence of continuing hope for the future. This is really cool. This takes everything I just said. I could have just showed you this and you'd know everything about the painting. This is really cool. I like it when we find cool places like this. Up close with George Washington. And this is the Lansdowne portrait. And I have to move this because it's in my way of clicking. So I'll put it all the way up here. National treasure. As a military and political figure, George Washington was a unifying force during the country's formative years. Not surprisingly, George Washington is by far the most well-represented president in the National Portrait Gallery's presidential collection. The most iconic image is the Lansdowne portrait painted from life by Gilbert Stuart in 1796. Gilbert Stuart, one of America's most talented portrait artists at the time, he painted Washington during his second term in office. Stuart was commissioned by Pennsylvania Senator William Bingham and his wife, Anne, to provide a gift to English statesman William Petty, first Marquis of Lansdowne, who, as Prime Minister, had negotiated the end of the Revolutionary War in 1793. Gilbert Stuart drew from European traditions of state portraiture to evoke Washington's military and civic leadership. The pose Stuart chose for the president is believed to allude to Washington's annual address in front of Congress in December 1795. The artist surrounded Washington with symbols of American democracy, such as an embedded flag in the frame of the chair. They called it a medallion in the packet. We won't quibble. The table's legs are adorned with American eagles. Now you can see them so much better up close. And they're holding the arrows, bundles of arrows with their talons, indicating their readiness for war. The books below the table refer to Washington's roles as commander of the American Army and as president of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. They are titled General Orders, American Revolution, and Constitution and Laws of the United States. I might point out This is different than what the packet says. In the packet, they say, copy of the Constitution, check. Then volumes of the Federalist, and then journals of Congress. So your general orders, American Revolution, Constitution, and laws of the United States. So remember the stuff in the packet. I will be writing my 700th email to a USAID about that. The books on the table document the new nation. They are titled, I see. Oh, wow. See, the previous part here, down here. Okay, so these are the two underneath. So, okay, the art packet does not mention all of the books. So there are more mentioned in the painting that our art packet mentions. So here they are, the missing books. Books on the table document the new nation. They're titled The Federalist, referring to the Federalist Papers that John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton wrote in 1787-88, and the Journal of Congress, which recorded the everyday actions and votes of Congress. So we do have those three. It's just that there's two more that the Art Resource Guide does not list. Pretty cool. There they are, here and here. And some loose sheets of paper here. The ornate chair and table, the columns, the curtain, while fictional, represent the Hall of Congress. A rainbow in the background breaking through a stormy sky symbolizes peace and prosperity after the American Revolution. Washington bears an ornamental sword as an emblem of his role in winning the American Revolution and as commander-in-chief. Its success as a presidential image was immediate, as the only full-length portrait that depicts Washington as president rather than as a general. The image was much admired by political supporters who commissioned versions for themselves, which kept Stuart in money for a while. Today, the iconic image remains a national treasure to the American people, and the Lansdowne serves as the centerpiece of the National Portrait Gallery's permanent exhibition. You go there, it's right there. The nation's only complete collection of presidential portraits outside the White House, this exhibition lies at the heart of the Portrait Gallery's mission to tell the American story through the individuals who shaped it. I will point this out to you for those who want to go down a rabbit hole, where I did say George hated sitting or standing for portraits. And this is quite long. I'm not going to read it to you, but if you want to read about how hard Stuart tried to get one paragraph. Faced with such an attitude, meaning George was not a pleasant sitter. Faced with such an attitude, Stuart carried his artistic arrogance to an extreme. After General Knox, Washington's first Secretary of War, had offended him, Mrs. Scully talked about General Knox, he used the general's portrait as the door for his pigsty. He refused to continue the picture of anyone who dared criticize the smallest detail. He would ring for his man and send the canvas up to the attic. Nor could all the tears of a lady who needed Stuart to enhance her social position make him change his mind when, quote, a gentleman of estimable character and no small consequence in his own eyes objected that Stuart's portrait of the rich but homely widow he had married did not make her beautiful. The artist cried, "What damn business is this of a portrait painter? You bring him a potato and expect he will paint a peach." There's just fun stuff. Here's where they talk about the president's new false teeth, and distorting his new false teeth did not distort his face as much as his old false teeth. And so just kind of interesting. It gets into the whole story of Martha Washington, General Washington, Molly Madison, and what a character Gilbert Stuart was. Oh, wait, is there one more? No, that was it. That was it. I think I'm done. And it's 5:54. Gazelle.
Gazelle, that is fantastic. And actually, I'm going to end a spec early because it turns out Nora's plane did not take off yet from Chicago. So they're having some issues with a bathroom not working. So they've deplaned. So luckily, she doesn't have to be there till tomorrow night. But fingers crossed that they put them all back on the plane again. So I am going to end this meeting. Todd, I will talk to you maybe tomorrow or the next day. We can do some running of transcripts.
Absolutely.
Everybody, I love you so very much. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to stop the recording. If you need me, text me or Discord me or whatever it is, and I will post Lee Tour Alligators. So have a wonderful night. And goodbye, 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 goodbye.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all good.